Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Saturday morning, talking 6 games around the NBA, talking the main slate. Not going to talk about the two afternoon games here. Before we dive into the slate, quick apology about yesterday. Was dealing with some issues with sound card, microphone, something going on. Hopefully, I have that resolved with some changes that I made yesterday, trying to troubleshoot that. Cannot guarantee that the issue won't happen again, but hopefully I can find ways to work around it in the future. My Twitter handle at Brent91 is in the description down below. If you're not subscribed to my daily content projections and all that good stuff, you can head over to the Twitter machine and hit the follow button over there. While you're doing that, you can send me a direct message. You can find out how you can get access to my content projections, Discord, and all that good stuff for 50% off now that we're 50% through the season. If you're not interested in a one-time price that carries you all the way through the playoffs, you can head over to my Patreon page. My Patreon address, patreon.com/BrentHyden, is in the description down below as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the games. Again, 6 games that we're going to be talking about here. First game of the night, Boston at Orlando. Boston 6.5-point favorites in this one, 213.5 over under. Mo Bamba and Aaron Baines going to miss this game. Kyrie Irving is shooting 52.3% in 3 games since returning from his eye issue. He has been pretty solid of late. I have some interest in the Boston side of this game. Kyrie Irving, I will get to in just a moment. The guy that I am highlighting in this spot, though, and the guy that I talked about in my notes, Marcus Morris. Marcus Morris comes in at 5,700 on DraftKings. He's really cheap over on FanDuel as well. He is just 4,800 over on FanDuel. This is a really, really good spot for Marcus Morris, who has been really consistent for the Boston Celtics for the majority of the season. And the reason why I really like him here in this spot is his three-point shooting. Orlando has really struggled against three-point shooters, allowing 37% on above the break threes. And they've allowed 36% shooting to power forwards. They rank 18th in defensive efficiency to the position. Taking a look at Marcus Morris here. Marcus Morris shooting 45% on three-point attempts this season, averaging about 27 minutes per night. Sometimes that goes a little bit higher, but this is just a really, really good spot for him. You do expect him to take, close to double-digit field goal attempts whenever he gets his full allotment of minutes. Again, the ability to hit those three-pointers really, really intrigues me in the spot for Marcus Morris. He's my favorite option from Boston. That being said, I do think Jason Tatum, Kyrie Irving, really, really solid options here as well, just because they do take a healthy portion of their shots from beyond the arc. Orlando has really struggled to keep point guards and small forwards in check as far as their field goal percentages, so I like those guys. Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, Al Horford, guys that you can sprinkle into tournament lineups, cash lineups, however you see fit, although I just don't really see a whole lot of reason to get too crazy with those guys. There's going to be other people that we're going to talk about tonight that I like a little bit more. On the Orlando side of this game, it is somewhat appealing for a couple of options here, and that starts with Nikola Vucevic. Continues to be one of the top offensive big men in the NBA. He comes in at 8,800 on DraftKings. That's pretty appealing over there. Over on FanDuel, he's not terribly expensive. He's 9,500. First of all, had a good game against Boston last time out. 24 points, 12 rebounds, 11 of 18 shooting. He's a guy you do feel pretty confident, even in tough matchups, is going to get you 40-plus fantasy points most nights. That's pretty appealing. But, he does lead the team in usage, 26.8%. Boston, over the last 10 games, 26th in defensive efficiency to centers. It's a trend that has continued with Aaron Baines being out. They're allowing 25.8 points, along with 16.3 rebounds and 56% shooting to the position. I really like Nikola Vucevic. I think he's going to be super low owned in this spot, and I have a lot of interest in him, even in cash games tonight. DJ Augustin, a guy, he's never an appealing name. No one ever wants to use DJ Augustin, but he comes in at 4,800 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. I like him as a cash game option just because he's generally going to get you 20-plus fantasy points. He did struggle against the Kings. That game was a little bit of a terrible outing, but most nights going to get you in the mid to low 20s, but he does have upside. Just scrolling through his game log, as you can see, he has 30-plus fantasy point upside, 40-plus fantasy point upside, and against the Celtics last time out, went 3 of 13 from the floor, still put up 31 fantasy points in the spot. I like DJ Augustin a significant amount here. Boston, one tournament value that I'm really interested in here is going to be Jonathan Isaac. Jonathan Isaac comes in at 3,600 on DraftKings, 4,400 on FanDuel. The reason why I like him: Boston allowing opposing small forwards to connect on 43.2% of their 3-point attempts over the last 10 games. Not only can he stuff the stat sheet, get you some rebounds, get you some steals, get you some blocks. He pulled down double-digit rebounds against his team last time out. He takes 32% of his shots from three. If Boston's going to let small forwards light them up from three, I think Jonathan Isaac makes for a very strong tournament option in this spot. You can look at Aaron Gordon, you can look at Terrence Ross, who comes in at 4,300. That's an appealing price tag for a guy that you feel pretty comfortable is going to get you 20 plus fantasy points. He's 5K on FanDuel, a little less appealing there. Really struggled against Boston last time these teams faced off. You can look at Evan Fournier as well. I'm mostly going to be focusing on Vucevic in all formats, Augustin, and maybe some Jonathan Isaac here tonight. Moving on to New Orleans at Minnesota. Minnesota, 2.5-point favorites in this one, 234.5 over under. Some news that we definitely need to keep an eye on here. Etuan Moore is questionable. That's somewhat important, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But Karl-Anthony Towns and Derrick Rose, two guys that are questionable for this game. Towns suffered an ankle injury last night. His status is still undetermined for this spot. And Derrick Rose, who returned from a lengthy absence, played 28 minutes last night, missed 6 games prior to that. He's not officially questionable as far as I saw, but I would be a little bit cautious because there is a chance he could sit this game out. Looking at the Pelicans side of things, I really like Anthony Davis. Obviously, it's Anthony Davis. I don't have to go too in-depth about why he's a good play. He has been just phenomenal recently, averaging 32 points and 15.5 rebounds over the past 4 games. He's matchup proof. Struggled a few games ago against the Rockets, but has topped 60 fantasy points in 7 of his last 10 games. Wolves giving up 46 rebounds per game. Obviously, Anthony Davis is a very good option here. Julius Randle, we did see him give up some minutes to Nikola Mirotic last time out. He only played 27 minutes. Obviously, some of that was also blowout. That being said, I do expect him to see right around 30 minutes tonight. Again, some of those minutes going the way of Nikola Mirotic. I still think he's fine in cash and tournaments in this spot. Minnesota ranks 16th in defensive efficiency to power forwards. Could have a pretty good game here. Minnesota, this was a trend that I highlighted last night with the Dallas Mavericks, but Minnesota getting torched on three-pointers lately. They're allowing 40.4% on above the break threes, 40% on corner threes. Etuan Moore, Nikola Mirotic, and Darius Miller, the names to keep an eye on here. We did see Mirotic play a decent amount of minutes, 21.5 minutes last game. I would expect him to get closer to 24, 25 in this spot. He's a guy that takes a lot of his shots from three. I really like Nikola Mirotic, 5,900 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel in tournaments. This is a pretty good spot here for him tonight. Etuan Moore, if he plays, is one of my favorite value options. 4,200 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. Again, Minnesota really struggling to defend the three-point line, but also really struggling to defend opposing small forwards. He has torched them in the last 2 times these teams have met. I really like Etuan Moore. He's going to be a core option in my lineups if he plays. If he sits, Darius Miller would be the name to keep an eye on. Minnesota is allowing point guards to rack up 11.3 assists per game over the last 10 games. That makes Elfrid Payton someone that we can definitely consider in tournaments. He comes in at 5,600 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. That DraftKings price is really tough to overlook. This is a pretty good spot here for him tonight. He has some triple-double upside. Has not really played that well recently, but we saw the upside that he has against Brooklyn. And in this spot, last time these teams faced off, only played 24 minutes, but still put up 20 fantasy points in limited minutes. Jrue Holiday is the same story every single night. Now that his price is coming down, he's under 8K on DraftKings, 7,800. He's 8,600 on FanDuel. I still feel pretty confident in saying he's a guy that's going to get you 40 plus fantasy points most nights. Has fallen shy a couple of these nights recently. But I still really like him, has been really solid against the Timberwolves in 2 games already this season. On the Minnesota side of things, it's really tough now that we know that Karl-Anthony Towns is questionable and Derrick Rose may or may not play in this spot. To break it down this early in the morning, Towns, 29.6% usage rate, 1.54 fantasy points per minute with that includes minutes with Rose, he is still a very, very strong cash and tournament option in this spot if he is able to suit up. Obviously, the matchup against Anthony Davis is not ideal, but Minnesota has allowed opposing centers to shoot 36% on three-point attempts, and they're giving up 50 points in the paint per game. That leads to Karl-Anthony Towns being able to have some success if he is able to suit up in this spot. Obviously has been really good against the Pelicans in two previous meetings this season. We saw against Dallas, even in a very tough matchup, still was able to muster a pretty strong game here, and just really, really, really good option in all formats. I like Andrew Wiggins a significant amount here. We will see him spend some minutes at the three, even with Derrick Rose and Jeff Teague being back. I'm going to get some two-guard lineups working in there. And if Towns misses, Andrew Wiggins, 35.3% usage rate, 1.19 fantasy points per minute. We saw Taj Gibson have a really good game last night. I'm still leaning towards Dario Saric being the better option most nights. He's 4,100 on FanDuel. I like him in tournaments. Taj Gibson, 4,600. I'm still leaning towards Saric being the right guy there. Teague, Rose, guys that you can look at if Towns misses, both would see a significant usage boost. I don't really have a lot of interest in any of them if Towns plays. And then Gorgie Jang would be the name to keep an eye on if Karl-Anthony Towns misses this game. I did cover in the breakdown notes who benefits most whenever Towns is out, so you'll want to pay attention and take a look at that, and then I'll update the projections in Discord if news comes out that Karl-Anthony Towns is going to miss this game. Moving on to the Spurs at OKC. OKC 5.5 point favorites in this game, 224.5 over under. Rudy Gay is out, Alex Abrinas is out, and Steven Adams is questionable, but he's going to play because it's Steven Adams and the dude could play through like a broken leg. Also with no Nerlens Noel, that kind of hurts the ability of Steven Adams to miss this game. I want to caution people against chasing what they saw a couple nights ago in that double overtime game. That being said, there are still some people to look at. Obviously, OKC's not going to give up 16 of 19 from three-point range. I don't think that's going to happen again tonight. I don't think Marco Bellinelli is going to come into the game and put up like 18 fantasy points in his first 9 minutes. That being said, I still have interest, and it's going to mostly be the same guys as it was last time. DeMar DeRozan leads the team in usage, 28.7%. Really, really strong floor and ceiling of late. That's been boosted by his potential assists, 10.6 potential assists per game, and 12.5 rebounding chances per game over the last 10 games. He had a good game against this team against OKC last time out. Didn't shoot very well, just 7 of 22 from the floor. He has shot poorly over the last few games, connecting on just 39% of his field goal attempts. I expect that to regress a little bit. Obviously, he's not going to be taking a lot of three-pointers, but his ability to get to the line and things like that also really, really help him. I still like him a little bit more than LaMarcus Aldridge, who I'll get to in just a moment. He does take 36% of his shots in the paint, where OKC is allowing 41% shooting this season. We saw him almost notch a triple-double against OKC. He has been flirting with a couple triple-doubles since dropping that one on Toronto. I still really like DeMar DeRozan in this spot. Derek White continues to be a really, really strong cash and tournament option, taking a lot of shots at the rim and high percentage shots, so I don't expect his shooting to regress too much, but it has a little bit. He's been down in the 50% range over the last few games, and he's still putting up really solid games because he's filling up the stat sheet with other peripherals, rebounds, assists, things like that. Obviously, big game against OKC last time out. He's going to be someone that is going to be very popular. He's 5,400 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. I still like him in all formats. Bryn Forbes, a very, very solid cash game option. Even in a ton of minutes last game, was not able to really have a huge outing, but he still put up 29 fantasy points. Most nights he's going to get you 20 plus. That's pretty appealing at 4,400 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. LaMarcus Aldridge does still draw a tough matchup, still taking a lot of his shots in the paint. 34% of them come in the paint. Again, it's still a good spot for him. He's still going to be a high usage option, still going to play a ton of minutes in a close game. Still going to score decently. I would caution against chasing his 56 fantasy points. and 4 blocks. That being said, LaMarcus Aldridge is still perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. You can look at Patty Mills or Marco Bellinelli, especially on FanDuel. Um, Bellinelli would be a guy that I would still have some interest in, even on DraftKings at 3,400. Um, he's still going to be like 25, 26 fantasy points is pretty much his ceiling. Doesn't really do a whole lot other than score, and that really, really hurts him, but he's someone to at least consider. On the Oklahoma City side of things, it starts with Russell Westbrook coming in at 11-8 on DraftKings. Obviously, he's a fantastic option in all formats, triple-double upside, blah, blah, blah. He's 12-4 on FanDuel. We know he's going to take a lot of shots. The assist numbers are going to be insane. The rebounding numbers are going to be insane. I don't really know what else to say about Russell Westbrook. You guys know the deal with him. I still like Paul George a little bit more, coming in at 9,500 on DraftKings, 9,700 on FanDuel, 40-plus fantasy point floor, 55, 60 point ceiling for the most part. Still had, 48 fantasy points in that game last time out. It's still a really good spot for Paul George. I still want to go back to the well with him here. I like Jeremy Grant as a mid-range value. We saw him put up a pretty strong game last time out. I still a guy that you're going to see most nights, 24 to 26 fantasy points. Could get a couple extra minutes if this game goes small with Steven Adams battling that ankle injury. I like Jeremy Grant as a pretty solid option. I'm not going to chase Terrence Ferguson putting up 25 fantasy points. He has been really good over the last couple games, but it's Terrence Ferguson. You know the deal with him. He has a really, really low floor and not really much of a ceiling. You can look at Dennis Schroeder as well in cash games or tournaments. He's just way too cheap for a guy that's going to play right around 30 minutes in this spot. Moving on to Denver at Phoenix. Denver 10-point favorites in this one, 220 over under. We do need to keep an eye on news for this as well. Devin Booker technically is questionable. I'm putting him closer to doubtful. Igor did say there was a slim chance that he would play. Will Barton is questionable. Gary Harris is questionable. And Trey Lyles is questionable. The Nuggets, unfortunately, without news of Gary Harris, Will Barton, and Trey Lyles, a little bit tough to break down in the spot. That being said, Nikola Jokic still a very good play, regardless of who suits up for the Nuggets and who doesn't. Coming in at 10-8 on DraftKings, draws one of the best matchups on the board, of course, against Phoenix, who is absolutely atrocious. He's also still fairly affordable priced over on DraftKings, or over on FanDuel, where he is 11K. Obviously, you're probably looking at a couple other options in that price tag, but the dude has been insane. Triple-double upside, of course, coming off a back-to-back triple-doubles. Double-digit rebounding is pretty much a lock in this spot against the Suns, who give up a boatload of rebounds per game, a boatload of fantasy points per game. They suck against centers. He will, of course, see a dip in usage if Will Barton does return, but that still doesn't concern me too terribly much. Outside of Jokic, I still really like Jamal Murray in this spot. Even if Barton and Harris do play, Jamal Murray, 7,400 on DraftKings, 7,300 on FanDuel. Phoenix does rank 23rd in defensive efficiency to point guards. They're giving out 24.3 points per game, 9.5 assists, and 44.4% shooting. Jamal Murray, hot and cold, but over 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games. This was a spot the last time these teams played off. He went absolutely bananas. Definitely raised his floor a little bit, 69.5 fantasy points in that game with 46 real points. But this is a really good spot for Jamal Murray. I like Gary Harris a significant amount if he plays, 5,400 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. It's a pretty good price over there. Would expect him to get a decent amount of minutes in this spot if he's able to suit up. If he plays and if Will Barton plays, you're not really looking at Torrey Craig or Malik Beasley. If Gary Harris sits or Will Barton sits, you can still look at Malik Beasley and Torrey Craig. As I preached the other night, don't ask me to pick one. Just don't, because I'm not going to be able to do it. It's whichever one has the hot hand is going to get the minutes. Last game, it was both of them. That being said, it could be Beasley this time. It could be Torrey Craig. Flip a coin. That's the best advice I can give. I would lean towards Malik Beasley and Monte Morris being the options that would have a better outing because they're more offensively skilled. But Torrey Craig has a pretty big penchant for putting a damper on that whenever I say the other two are the better options. Mason Plumlee would get a few extra minutes if Trey Lyles were to miss this game. Mason Plumlee is still kind of interesting at 4,600 on DraftKings, 4,500 over on FanDuel, just because he's a high point per minute guy, going to play 18, 19, 20 minutes most likely. That's still somewhat interesting in this spot. The Phoenix side of things, we need to wait on Devin Booker news. If Devin Booker plays, it would be tough to fade him, even though Denver has been a pretty good defense for the majority of the season. But he's 8,600 across the industry. That would be pretty appealing here. Denver, over the last 10 games, has really struggled to defend the rim, allowing 69.2% shooting at the rim, and they've really struggled on corner threes, allowing 42.5%. DeAndre Ayton would be a great tournament option here. Obviously, the matchup with Nikola Jokic, not great, but 22.5% usage rate, averages 1.18 fantasy points per minute without Devin Booker on the floor, and takes 58% of his shots at the rim. DeAnthony Melton sees a boost as well. Phoenix does rank fourth in defensive efficiency to point guards, but 1.13 fantasy points per minute with Devin Booker off the floor. His shot profile, where he takes a decent amount of his shots at the rim, taking 23% there, 40% from beyond the arc, 13% of those shots are corner threes, would lend him to being a pretty strong value option or mid-range option in the spot. McCall Bridges, well, he doesn't have a ton of upside, comes in at 3,900 on DraftKings, 4,300 on FanDuel. He's someone else that I have interest in here as a value option. 32% of his shots come at the rim, 22% of his shots are corner threes, 53% of his shots overall from beyond the arc. He actually he should play a decent amount of minutes, especially if Booker is out. I would expect the minutes to climb back up towards 27, 28, maybe 30. And this is a spot where he actually has had success twice already this season, averaging 26.3 fantasy points per game against Denver, 29.5 the last time these teams played He's a pretty strong value in this spot. Tonight, TJ Warren, Josh Jackson can be used in all formats. Both guys, about 26% usage rate, averaging over a fantasy point per minute without Booker. TJ Warren, the guy here, 33% of his shots come at the rim, 11% are corner threes. 6,800 on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. Has not been great against Denver. But without Devin Booker, obviously the usage, we did see, 42 fantasy points last time out, going to play a lot of minutes. He'd be a strong option. Kelly Oubre, value option here tonight. Chicago at Utah. Man, Utah 11-point favorites in this game. 205.5 over under. Oh, the Bulls gave up like 40-something real points to the Warriors in the first quarter last night. They've lost by an average of 17.2 points during their 6-game losing streak and have allowed an average of 135 points over the last 2 games. Zach LaVine scored 29 points on Friday, is averaging 26.3 over his last 4 games. The Bulls are in a terrible spot. Utah Jazz, league's top defense over the last 15 games, 101.7 defensive rating. They have struggled to defend the three-point line, allowing 38.3% on above the break threes, 45.6% on corner threes. So, if you're looking at anyone from Chicago, which you probably should not be, there are a couple guys to consider. 42% of Larry Markkanen's field goal attempts are from 3. Utah does rank second in defensive efficiency, 2 power forwards, but he's cheap, $6K on DraftKings. Tournament viable there, 6,800 on FanDuel, blah. But again, with a lot of his shots coming from 3, he could have some success in this spot. So I wouldn't completely overlook him in tournaments. Has really struggled recently, but is better than what he's been playing. Bobby Portis, 4,500, is a little bit interesting. 5,400 on FanDuel, not as interesting. He's a guy you do feel pretty comfortable is going to play 24 to 28 minutes in a close game. Unfortunately, the Bulls haven't been able to keep any of these games close, but he does have upside, just a high point per minute guy off the bench and a high usage guy off the bench. Jim Boylan is a Stone Age basketball coach and preaches inside out offense, which basically means he doesn't want as many 3-pointers. Zach LaVine, 25% of his shots do come from 3. If Chicago has any hope in keeping this close, Zach LaVine has to be heavily involved and has to have a really good game. was not able to do much of anything other than score. Has not done much of anything other than score recently, or for the most of the season for that matter. But 6,100 on DraftKings, 6,900 on FanDuel. He's a strong tournament option. So is Chris Dunn. Yeah, that'd be about it. That's all I have for Chicago. Like, I can't muster anything nice to say about this team. It's just so bad. On the Utah side of this thing, much better spot here. Donovan Mitchell, 41.2% usage rate, 1.22 fantasy points per minute without Rubio, Exum, Neto, Cephalosha, Grayson Allen, and every other injured person they have off the floor. He's going to play a lot of minutes, even in a blowout. If this game blows out, it's because he's having a big game. It's like kind of like Harden the other night. When you have a guy that's going to be touching the ball as much as Donovan Mitchell is, his hand is going to be in everything that happens tonight. So that means you still want to get some exposure to him. He's a core option for me. Yeah, there's really not much else to say. Rudy Gobert is interesting here. He does struggle without Ricky Rubio, but we did see him have a pretty strong game last night. He's 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,400 on FanDuel. I like him more in tournaments. He's gonna struggle a little bit to score without Ricky Rubio, but the rebounding upside is still going to be there, especially against a Chicago team that can't hit a shot to save their life. I do like him in tournaments. You can look at Royce O'Neal, Kyle Korver, two top value options. I did rag on Royce O'Neal I called him really bad chalk yesterday. He played 40 minutes, put up 32 fantasy points. You can go back to the well there. It'd be fine at 3,900 on DraftKings. He's 3,500 on FanDuel. You can go back to the well, Kyle Korver in this spot. Other than that, Chicago really, really bad against power forwards, 20th in defensive efficiency. Jay Crowder, Derek Favors, really, really strong options. We saw Crowder do his, usual mid-20s in fantasy points, 2 of 11 from the floor, and still put up a really strong game. Derek Favors in the spot, 5,100, a little bit too cheap, has been over 30 fantasy points in 2 of the last 4. We saw him have a good game last night. Rebounding upside is there for him in the spot. I really like Derek Favors. Just get some Utah exposure because the Bulls are terrible. Moving on, Charlotte at Sacramento. Sacramento 5.5 point favorites, 235 over under. Buddy Hield, 18 points, has scored fewer than 20 points in 3 straight games after having 20 or more in 14 of his last 17 games. I have some concern with Charlotte here. James Borrego did hint at some lineup changes. Trailblazers shot 56% from the floor last night. Charlotte shot just 40%. If I had to guess at what maybe those lineup changes would be, it could be Frank Kaminsky as like a starting center. It could be Malik Monk getting in the starting lineup. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There are a few options to consider from the Charlotte side of things. Kemba Walker, obviously in a really, really good spot. Kings ranked 20th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards. He still has like a 32% usage rate without Cody Zeller on the floor. He's just been really, really bad without Cody Zeller. Some of that comes from not having the assist upside because no one on the team can hit a shot when they're shooting like 40% from the floor. He's also shot really, really poorly because his pick and roll partner has been out. And Willie Hernan-Gomez, Bismack Biyombo, not very good at setting screens. And he'd be tournaments only for me in this spot. Outside of that, Jeremy Lamb, really, really good spot here. Kings, 38th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards. They really, really struggle to defend the rim in the paint. Mid-range, Lamb takes 71% of his shots in those areas. Has some rebounding upside in the spot. He's been a guy for the majority of the season. You feel pretty confident most nights going to get you in the mid to upper 20s. Has potential if he gets over 30 minutes and, is pulling down a couple rebounds to have a big game. I like Jeremy Lamb a significant amount. He's 5,800 on FanDuel, 5,500 on DraftKings. Tony Parker could miss this game with it being a back-to-back. He has had a tendency to rest in spots like this. That would be a boost to Devontae Graham and Malik Monk, 2 guys that you can look at for value. I would still wait and see if we're going to get news on a potential lineup change, though. Marvin Williams, one of my favorite options in this spot. He struggled last night, but he's 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Most nights going to take double-digit field goal attempts. Rebounding upside is there against a Kings team that really struggles against power forwards. They're 23rd in defensive efficiency to power forwards, 27th in defensive efficiency to centers. He has double upside in this spot. They're giving up 48.9 rebounds per game. I mentioned the part about centers because he has been spending some time as like a backup 5 small ball center. I really like him. Him and Lamb are my two favorite options from this game, from the Charlotte side of this game. You can look at Hernangomez, Biyombo. Borrego's just been so inconsistent with his center minutes. We saw Hernangomez only get 13 minutes last night. We saw Biyombo get a few more. He got 22. I'd lean towards him getting a few more minutes than Hernangomez. Both of these guys have upside if they can get the minutes. Unfortunately, it'd be just tournaments here. Like I said, Frank Kaminsky could get in the lineup. That'd be something to keep an eye on. And then Malik Monk, pretty solid on FanDuel at 4,200 as a tournament option. He's just been playing pretty solid recently. Still limited minutes, 207 from the floor last night, but a couple of these other games recently, Clippers and Denver, playing really well. I like Malik Monk as a tournament option here tonight. On the Sacramento side of things, it starts with De'Aaron Fox. I think he's still too cheap, especially on DraftKings for the upside that he has. I know he's been pretty poor recently. I've hinted at that several times. He's 8,700 on FanDuel, by the way. I've hinted at it several times that whenever Bogdanovic is in the starting lineup, De'Aaron Fox is a guy that I want to fade. His assist numbers go down. His usage does actually perform worse with Bogdanovic in the starting lineup. Detroit was a blowout. Orlando was a blowout. Had solid games in limited minutes against those two teams. De'Aaron Fox, 7,900 on DraftKings. Again, if you think this game stays close, De'Aaron Fox, really tough to fade here. Charlotte ranks 16th in defensive efficiency to point guards. I really like Buddy Hield here. I expect him to get back over the 20-point mark in this spot. He comes in at $6,500 on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. Charlotte, 26th in defensive efficiency to shooting guards on the season. This is a really good spot here for Buddy Hield. I like him on Shumpert as a value play. I think Willie Cauley-Stein is one of my favorite center options on the board. Charlotte, 22nd in defensive efficiency. The centers allowing 23.4 points, 15.8 rebounds. Their lack of rim protection also bodes really well for him because he takes 67% of his shots at the rim. Willie Cauley-Stein, 6,900 on DraftKings, 7,600 on FanDuel, over 40 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. That is really appealing here tonight. You can look at Harry Giles as a value on somewhere like on FanDuel, or if you're building a bunch of DraftKings lineups. I like Marvin Bagley as a tournament option, 5K on DraftKings. That's really appealing. 5,300 on FanDuel. That's somewhat appealing as well. And then you can look at Nemanja Bjelica as a tournament option. You can look at Justin Jackson if Bogdanovic misses this game. Bogdan himself is fine if he's able to suit up in this spot tonight. That's going to do it for the slate. Kept it right around 30 minutes is what I was aiming to do. Good luck in all your contests tonight. I will be back on Monday.